I have a lawyer who I work with who every kind of unusual case that she does a focus group before she even files. Because at that point, you have limited facts, right? And that's okay because you want to know, okay, just with these facts, where do people go? Like, what's the assumption? What are they clueless about? And that really helps her kind of guide through where to go for discovery. Like, what are the big pieces that people want to know, and other things that they don't care about. They don't want to know. And so it's like, okay,
Yeah.
great. I won't waste my time there. I'll go over here. And then even when you get into discovery, what I love people to do is do a huge discovery on documents, right? Get those policies, get those rules, and consumer cases are full of paper. So it's
Right.
like, then bring those papers, right? Bring some of those big policies and say, would would you expect them to be following this? Yeah. How do you think they would be enforcing this? How do you think they're going to be supervising people? Or, and it's like, oh, okay, now you take that information and then you go hammer them in deposition.
Yeah, I think that's great uses of that resource. And I think those points are great points. And I actually done the pre-filing focus group in the past myself, but uh, I see where there'd be a lot of wisdom in it, especially in certain types of cases, right? Especially if I know employment law cases are often about credibility, right? What do people think about the plaintiff? At that case, as much as any, might be one where, you know, the perception of the plaintiff might be as outcome determinative as anything, right? Because a lot of times it simply is, he said, she said about what transpired, or she said, he said, depending on the scenario. And so you really would want to know, you know, what do people think about my client early on? And that would be good information. And then, like you said, the idea that there are places that jurors find important, or would be jurors, mock jurors, um, that you need to make sure you shore up and you prove up your preparation. And I do think that it makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways as I think about that mindset. We do all have, as lawyers, sort of we latch on to things and we think they're super important. And then, it depends on how far you want to go into your case before you figure out you're wrong.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's after the verdict, and sometimes you do it early enough to get yourself time to react and get to the right places. And that's you know I mean, it's the analogy of finding the right way to go. I mean, it I would guess that, probably even, knowing what you've charged for a formal pretrial focus group. I mean, the cost of a virtual focus group to get the right focus at the outset probably is a money saving venture, I would guess.
I mean, that's the way that's what I tell people, and that's what I have seen to be true is, for example, again, my good friend who comes to me because she knows, like, okay, and we talked about this the other day with her. She said, okay, this is why I do this. I want to know if it's an unusual fact pattern, or if it's something that's a little bit of a one-off for people, or maybe it's something that, like, I am really worried about. That helps me know, like, oh, okay, here's where I focus, or here's my direction. And then she goes and does her work, and then she comes back and she tests after she's got everything. Okay, did it come out? Like, is the case seem strong? And then she does some trial prep ones. But um, I think that you really want to know at the outset, especially in any consumer employment, personal injury, do they care? Do they care about what happened here? And you don't want to wait until you get down the road and figure out, like, people just don't care about what happened. And it's like, oh, the example, and is she had a case where it was a 6-year-old kid, has an interaction with his basketball coach that the whole team's there. It's very humiliating. And the school district, kind of gives the guy a slap on the wrist, and the school, I mean, of course, all the kids, they go on social media, they create all these accounts, they got this poor kid's face all over it. And a lot of the focus group just said, so what? Who cares? That's not the school's job. They can't do that. Like, what are they supposed to do? Like, and it's like, oh, okay. So then she's like, all right. So, she then has the ability to decide, okay, now do I keep going forward with this? Or do I know I need to go over on this route and I need to really kind of not talk about that whole social media reaction kind of thing? Unless it comes in for damages, but it really, for her, helps them know, like, okay, which way to go, which way not to go. And we've even done focus groups for her where she decides it's just not a viable case and they don't go forward because, kind of what you're saying, when you have a bunch of people who could be responsible, the general contractor, the subcontractor, the other subcontractor,
The other brother subcontractor.
that's right. Like, and you want that general contractor, right? Hello. And they're just like, no. They're like, no way. Like, it's definitely this. And you're like, so they just decided, from a cost perspective, it was not going to make any sense because they're going to have so many experts, and like, so they just didn't file the case. Better to know then than to wait
Then
right down the
$100,000
road.
later. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I
No,
know. Go ahead.
I was just to say, I mean, if you just think about the cost today, and you're not that far from working in plaintiff's personal injury, you paid these bills not that long ago. I mean, I pay a 30B6 deposition, was videotaped the other day with video syncing, and you're $3,200 to do a 30B6 deposition. And I mean, I'm not boxing you on prices, but you're pretty reasonable in that range for just to figure out if you even got a case or not. And then, like you say, the other part of it is, hey, does this really piss people off? I mean, for me on a consumer case, the thing I've always hung my hat on the cases I've tried is that I realize that this does make people incredibly angry, and it touches on some of their core fears about things like the security of their housing, and having that stripped away from you by someone's arrogance or ignorance or just malevolence, that resonates, right? I mean, that's something I learned before I met you and before I had the resources to pursue doing these things correctly and fully. But I was able to pick up that people reacted viscerally to the idea that someone lost their home because a bank wouldn't agree to a modification that the court had ordered, or that a bank had messed up a calculation and caused someone to go to foreclosure. People get really pissed about that, right? You're putting people on the street over a formula and a spreadsheet you can't get right. I mean, people can, react, but you need that. If you want to have a successful consumer case, you better have a big impact on the person or the family, and you better have something that folks get their hair on fire about, or else you're spending a lot of money and time against really good lawyers, and it's like, shit, did I, have I run off in the ditch, so yeah, that idea of spending, even if your costs were $5,000, I know it's not that much to do a virtual, but even if it were $5,000, it would be money well spent to figure out, like you said, just that question is so important. Of, you think something is people are going to think that this is a huge factor and a big deal, and then you find out, no, it's really not. And it sort of sucks the life out of the case, where you thought the value was, and where you thought the real injury was, and then you realize, hey, that's not really, it's not even upsetting to most people. Then you saved the clients the trouble, the heartache, the headache of going through living that for a couple of years, and you saved yourself the money that you would have spent in a case that wasn't going anywhere, and you've been able to focus your time and reallocate to the right place. So it's a great, and I actually think, you haven't said that, I'm like, I'm going to start calling Elizabeth before I get very deep into some of these things. I mean, it made me start scratching my head thinking about my dog, and I'm like, hey, there's a couple I probably ought to run this on right now. But yeah, I think it's a great use of the resource.
Yeah.
Um,
And the cool thing is too, is if you're not sure, so some people, you want to have more than one data point, right? You want to have more than one, like it's so much easier to have with virtual to run it again. And even if you did it a week later, right? Again, super easy and speedy to put together. But I mean, a lot of people do that just because one, you want a little bit more certainty. You want to, hear from a different group of people, but it's very easy to do that virtually, and rerun it. Okay, is this really, people really don't care about this, or you just kind of tool it and go at it again and think, okay, well, here's some things that we didn't give them. Because the nice thing about virtual, which some lawyers are like, I don't know if it's nice or not, but when you have limited time, you really have to make decisions about what you will focus group. You can't do it all. And that's half the battle as a lawyer in a case. You can't bring every fact to trial. You can't bring
no,
every fact to mediation. Like, you have to make those decisions, and having somebody help you do that, having those potential jurors help you do that, significantly saves your time and energy. And like, we're all limited. We only have 24 hours in a day. That's everybody. So this is a tool that people can use to really go after what's important versus trying to select and figure it out. And, going to other lawyers is a great resource, but they have the same mindset we do, right? So that's why
you're still
going to
infected though.
going to a focus group, and
We all have that infection. We're all thinking like they
that's
programmed
right.
us in school to think certain ways, and so
That's
we have
right.
to, we don't, I try to tell people. I used to tell people when I was solo that I was an interpreter. I interpreted lawyer to English, and it was my kind of one of my lawyer jokes. The other ones I can only divide by three. That's why I'm not in medical school or pharmacy school. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it's that idea that the block that we have as lawyers and what we get turned on by is infected by our legal training, and it doesn't always make the rubber meet the road with real people. And that's the part that we have to, sort of sort out what's going to be, and I think that's an incredibly good use of resources to get ahead of it, especially if it's a case that, like, the case you were discussing, where you're talking about a child in a school and they got special rules and there's limits to liability and you got to have experts. And, man, you're talking about, minimum 50 grand to get that case to trial, maybe 100. And, whatever it costs to figure out early that there's a gaping wound in your theory is much better than finding it out because you didn't do that. So yeah, it's a wonderful idea and concept, and it's, as I think about it, I feel like, dang, I want to beat my head on the desk for not having engaged in it more myself.